Hey everyone, thanks for watching 3dmotive.com. This is Donald, and in this video we will be covering how to easily set up a second UV channel for your game asset to be used inside of a game engine that uses Lightmaps. Now this tutorial is intended for intermediate or beginner levels, and it assumes that you already know the basics of 3ds Max object creation, as well as the basics of UVW mapping. Now if you're like me, you're not going to want to unwrap this object twice. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you a couple quick tricks to take advantage of that first UV set that you've already created for your asset and use that for your second UV set that we will use for light maps later on inside of UDK. Now if I go ahead and bring up the Unwrap UVW window, you can take a look at our first UV set. But if I go ahead and switch this to the second map channel by clicking up under the map channel and then pressing Reset UVWs, this will go ahead and bring up our second UV set that you can see here. Now the way that a game engine is going to calculate the light map is going to be based on this second UV channel. So as you can see, with a real big nasty mess like this, we're not going to get very high quality light maps. So our goal is to create a nice clean second UV set that we can use here to get the highest quality light map possible. So to start with, let's go ahead and go back down to map channel 1, press the Reset UVW button, and what we want to do here is go ahead and save out a copy of this UV channel by clicking on the Save button. Go ahead and give our UV channel a name. It doesn't matter what you call it, but I'm going to go ahead and call it UVW1 and then go ahead and press save. That'll go ahead and save out that UV to a separate file. And so from here, we'll go ahead and load back into map channel 2, press the Reset UVWs button, and then when you get to your second channel, go ahead and click the load button and bring up that UVW file that you saved. So that will go ahead and take that first nice clean UVs that we created and stick it here into map channel 2, and applying just a few quick tricks, we can create a really great second UV channel which will ultimately be used to generate our light maps inside of our game engine. Now when creating a second UV channel to be used for light maps, there's a few rules that are a little different than you may be accustomed to with your first UV channel. One of them is that we need to look out for inverted faces, we need to look out for overlapped faces, and we also need to make sure that we have a little bit of space between all of our UV chunks. And so if I go ahead and zoom in really close, you can see that a lot of these are really close to each other. And so ultimately what will happen is it's very possible that some of the lighting information from this surface may tend to kind of bleed over onto these surfaces over here. So let's go ahead and pull the camera all the way back by clicking on the Zoom Extents button. And by doing that, it will reveal any UVs that you may have outside of the 0 to 1 space. Now the 0 to 1 space is indicated with this blue box, which is right now just outside of all of our UVs. When working with UVs in your first UV channel, it's always fine to go ahead and move outside of that if you need to. But when working with light maps, you definitely need to keep everything inside of that box. And so from here, we're going to start with checking for inverted faces. And a quick way to do that is to go ahead and make sure that we're in the Face Subobject mode and clicking on Select Inverted Faces. Now as you can see here, I have quite a few inverted faces, which is carried over from my first UV set. So to quickly fix this, we can go ahead and click on the Mirror Horizontal button, and that's going to go ahead and flip those UV islands. So the next step is to go ahead and pack all of our UVs back into this blue box and ensure that we have nothing overlapped. Now thankfully 3ds Max has a tool that can take some of the legwork out for us. So I'm going to go ahead and select all of my UV islands and go ahead and click Tools, Pack UVs. Now from here, I'm going to go ahead and make sure that recursive packing is what we have selected. I'm going to go ahead and bump up the spacing just a little bit. And under Normalize Clusters, Rotate Clusters, and Fill Holes, I'm going to go ahead and press OK. Now the default pack that 3ds Max gave us turned out pretty good, but we're really going to want to go in and maximize the UV space as best as we can. One of the things that we'll do before we do that is we really want to go in and we want to make sure that we minimize the amount of UV shells as possible. So for example, this chunk here, I know is connected to these two pieces up top. So I'm going to want to go ahead and grab those edges and go ahead and stitch those two together so that we can ensure that when this goes to create a light map, there's not some sort of an odd break in between these two pieces where these corners go. So by going in and stitching some of these chunks in, what you're doing is you're going to minimize any sort of awkward lighting issues that may come from having multiple edges or multiple breaks inside of your UV seams. Now one of the other steps that I'm going to do before I decide to go ahead and wrap these UVs up and really kind of get in there and pack these a little bit tighter is I'll probably go into some of the pieces of the mesh that I know need to receive just a little bit more lighting information, some of the parts that might be a little bit more important than others. Now by default, all of these are going to have basically the exact same amount of lighting information. But we know that probably the front of this screen and some of the basic housings of this box on the back of the television are probably a little bit more important than, say, the little tips of the antenna up here along the top. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead in my UV window is go ahead and switch to element mode while in the face sub object mode, and go ahead and probably scale those up just a bit more. I know that they're a little bit more important, and so therefore each of these objects is then going to go ahead and receive a considerable amount of higher resolution for our final light map. So I've gone ahead and scaled those pieces up. I think those are probably some of the more important pieces. And then from here, I'm going to go ahead and repack the UVs once again. I'm going to go ahead and grab everything, go under Tools, Pack UVs, go ahead and change that back to 0.3, and go ahead and rotate and fill holes, and press OK. Now the last little bit of this, as the time lapse here kind of starts to take off, is essentially I'm going to go in and I'm going to look for any of these little small chunks of UV spaces that I could actually kind of go in and scale up or down. Now, you'll also notice that as I'm doing this, occasionally I'll kind of go in and I'll squash or resize the UV islands just a bit more. Now, stretching isn't really an issue when it comes to working with light maps. You can actually kind of stretch or skew your UV islands as much as you need to, just to really maximize the UV space. Now as I'm doing this also, I'll really want to be careful about any sort of overlapping. I'll want to try to avoid any overlapping UVs. I'll also, kind of go back and forth checking for inverted faces just to make sure, in case I, accidentally hit a button I didn't mean to. I'll always go in and check some of that. And then I'm just really kind of a last little pass to really try to get as much out of my UV space as possible. Because, when it comes down to creating that good second UV channel, ultimately this is going to determine, just how good or bad your lighting is going to be on this specific asset. So you definitely want to go in there and, spend that extra little, 5-10 minutes to kind of go in and, scale these pieces up as best as you can, and really try to take advantage of any, gaps or holes or anything that, can potentially improve the quality overall of your UV space when you're finished. Alright, so once that's all finished, we're going to go ahead and move our UV window out of the way just a little. And then to go ahead and make sure that we save this UV information into our static mesh, we're going to go ahead and right click on Unwrap UVW, and we're going to hit Collapse To. Now you may get an error message that pops up, and we're just going to go ahead and hit Yes. And that's essentially going to go ahead and bake that UV information into our game asset. And so if you want to check it, you can go ahead and click on the Unwrap UVW again. And here we should be looking at Map Channel 2. And if I go ahead and go back down in the stack and then click on Reset UVWs, this is going to take us back to our original UVs when we first started on this asset. And so if I just want to toggle back and forth, just to be safe, hit that Reset button again, and there we go. And so once again, I'm going to go ahead and right click Collapse To. And now we're basically finished. Now we're ready to go ahead and throw this object into Unreal. Alright, so I've gone ahead and brought our television here into UDK, and if done correctly, right off the bat you should see UV Channels 2 up here in the left hand corner inside the generic browser. Now if you'd like to actually see the UVs, you can go ahead and click on the Show UV Overlay button in the upper left hand corner. And if we go ahead and bring up the Properties window by clicking on Window, Properties, over here under Lightmap Coordinate Index, by default UDK will set this to 1, which in 3ds Max is actually the UV channel number 2. And so if we wanted to go ahead and see what our first UV channel looked like, we could go ahead and type in 0, which is essentially the UV channel number 1 from 3ds Max. So if you go ahead and toggle these back and forth, you'll be able to quickly validate whether or not your second UV channel imported correctly. And when you're finished, you can go ahead and close the UV window as well as the properties. So this concludes our tutorial on creating a second UV channel for light maps. I hope you enjoyed this tutorial, and be sure to check out some of our other videos. And thanks again for watching 3dmotive.com.